members, before we proceed with today's business, I wish to announce that the vacancies which occurred in the National Assembly due to the passing of Ms. B. Maluleke and Ms. T.M.A. Tongwane have been filled by the nomination of Ms. G.T. Mkwevu and Advocate T.M. Masuta with effect from 23 August 2021, respectively. The members have made and subscribed the oath in the Speaker's office. I wish to welcome you, honorable members. I believe the members are in the house. Welcome, honorable members. Some of them have just taken a break, they're back. Lastly, honorable members, in the interest of safety for all present in the chamber, please keep your mask on and sit in your designated area and restrict your movements to an absolute minimum. The Secretary will read the first and second orders together.
Consideration of report of Portfolio Committee on Social Development on impact of civil unrest in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng on social development services and Department of Social Development's response for urgent food relief to affected communities. And consideration of report of Portfolio Committee on Basic Education on joint oversight visit with Select Committee on Education and Technology, Sport, Arts and Culture to KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng Provincial Education Departments.
Thank you. The first speaker on the speakers list is the Honorable B.P. Mbinko Gigaba. The Honorable Member.
Thank you very much, House Chair. The Committee on Basic Education undertook a visit with the Select Committee on Education and Technology, Sport, Arts and Culture to KZN and Gauteng from the 9th to the 13th of August, 2021. We went to KZN for an oversight visit, which was meant to monitor and oversee the overall damages to school property and infrastructure during the recent July 2021 unrest, which saw criminals targeting schools for vandalism, looting, burglaries, and how this impacted the state of schooling in these affected districts. The joint committees sought to have an understanding of any further challenges being faced, the contingency plans in place, what still needs to be addressed, and possible assistance that could be forthcoming. We then made recommendations as it relates to KZN Provincial Department of Education. The committee made the following recommendations: that the school establish a functioning safety and security committee. Our community police forums, our ward committees and SAPs must be visible at schools to ensure that there are regular patrols. Where there are overgrown bushes and grasses, the committee recommended that cutting and clearing of overgrown bushes within the school grounds, as this pose a safety and security risk. The committee recommended that schools can utilize their norms and standard budget for some of the repairs. That is, for instance, your broken windows and gutters, for the maintenance of schools, as some of the damages occurred long before the unrest. The district urged to submit a detailed breakdown of the damages to all KZN schools. Schools are vandalized every day. As it relates to the Gauteng Provincial Department, the following recommendations were made. The committee recommended the availability and services of security guards at schools to protect and safeguard schools' property and infrastructure. But what we've seen is that these schools, where these security guards, where they are working during the day, and we think that needs to be changed because teachers are there and learners are there during the day, so you don't actually need them during the day. The committee urged the department to ensure that there is sufficient number of night patrollers employed by the school for sufficient and effective service school. We have recommended for replacement of mobile schools with permanent structures, and that these mobile schools should be a top priority. The committee recommended that schools consider and adopt a COP initiative to mitigate issues of safety and security. We recommend for installation and perimeter fencing as urgent in order to curtail the movement of animals like goats that roaming at the school's premises. In line with this, the school safety policy members recommend for establishment of functional safety committee to assist the schools. As it relates to the national departments, but national department working with both provinces, we are of the view that they must organize road shows and awareness campaigns to sensitize parents and local community on issues of safety and security of school property and infrastructure. They must ensure that they fix the leaking roofs as well as attend to damages of ceiling boards. In collaboration with the Department of Social Development, the Department of Basic Education and Provincial Education Department must solicit for the deployment of social workers for schools where there was a necessity in order to provide learners with support. Mobile structures must be replaced by building more permanent structures. They need to prioritize prioritize the vandalized schools for refurbishment and repair. They need to correct the quintiling of schools. Where there is a need for revision, that needs to be done. Training and development of SGB members must be conducted on issues of safety and security for schools in line with the National School Safety Framework Program. We wish to categorically condemn the current lootings that engulfed the nation last month. As members of this House, we must urge our communities to take on the mission of patriotism and nation building to heart. And whilst we respect the right of every South African to peaceful demonstration as enshrined in our Constitution, that right should be exercised with responsibility. Moreover, our children should not bear the brunt for the unwarranted attacks on their places of learning. The ANC-led government continue to emphasize the primacy of the peoples as the fundamental basis of the security of our communities and public facilities, and that these communities should be at the forefront of protecting the idea of people's power. As a nation, we should stand together and never allow these corrupt activities to take place again. Thank you very much, Honorable.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable A. Abrams.
Thank you, House Chair, and good afternoon all. For those of us who do not reside in KZN, we all watched the news channels in horror during the July week of mayhem. This only gave us a glimpse of the looting and destruction that took place and how livelihoods were affected, with it subsequently carrying over into parts of Gauteng. My colleague, the Honourable Bridget Masango, wrote to the chairperson of the Social Development Committee that this committee goes to KZN and Gauteng to assess the situation on the ground, as it became apparent that we did not know the full extent of the devastation. Staff shared harrowing accounts of how they painfully and helplessly watched as the very community they serve stole and destroyed social development and SASSA officers, while calls for police assistance went unanswered as SAPs were severely under-resourced and rendered helpless. Staff at the Vulamelo DSD office told the committee how they warned SAPs and senior officials of the pending unrest as flyers of the protests circulated days before. The long-lasting impact of this destruction to social development and SASSA clients is immeasurable. Destruction of the post offices, together with hundreds of ATMs, have left thousands vulnerable, unable to access their life-saving grants, and the knock-on effect of being forced to pay exorbitant transport costs to travel to alternative service points, not to mention the increase of food costs due to shortages. Client files and servers were burnt and stolen. Casework files on child protection, affidavits, interviews, foster care and adoption records, gone. To build up these case files will take years, and many children and vulnerable families will most certainly be lost in the cycle of poverty and abuse. Minister, if there was ever a time to employ the hundreds of unemployed social work graduates, it is now. They are desperately needed in these affected areas. Replacement vehicles for social workers must be prioritized as they are required to visit families in the remote rural areas. Without it, these families and children will remain unheard and unseen. 478,400 Gauteng households are in need of immediate food relief. This was the figure reported to us by the provincial DSD, and this is only the backlog. We asked the department for the hotline number for the purpose of this food relief. Officials refused to give it because they are fully aware that hunger in the province significantly outweighs the budget. Once again, it was NGOs who stepped up where government could not, yet NGO budgets are always first on the chopping block. We must adequately fund NGOs and CNDCs to ensure seniors and children receive daily meals, instead of wasting billions on beef and chicken to fly around in the sky on failed airlines. The irony, of course, not lost on the delegation who arrived at Cape Town International Airport to find our Mango airline grounded and in business rescue. We learnt of local heroes during this oversight, such as the building landlord of the Pan-Africa Mall. He knew that the SASSA life-saving grant is life-saving to the residents of Alexandra and immediately ensured water and electricity was restored, toilets and basins immediately replaced in order for the office to reopen. Unlike government, where we wait months on a supply chain management process at prices 10 times higher. Though the most telling story of this oversight was the visit to the Luvo Community Center in eThekwini, where only the building shell remains. When staff asked looters, "Why are you stealing from a government community center?" the response was, "What has government done for me?" Now, this does not give the selfish and cowardly act of looting any legitimacy, but it is a legitimate question. What has government done for me? This, colleagues, is the biggest takeaway for our government, and government must be held accountable. This government only shows South Africa how to loot brazenly with pride and, to date, total impunity. Another huge takeaway from this oversight is that we must go digital with offsite servers when it comes to client files. We cannot remain in the doldrums of the past keeping paper records. The DA's message to South Africans: if you want a government to work for you, to work with you, it's time to choose an alternative. Choose the DA who demonstrates that we care and we make a tangible difference in your life. The ballot box is a far more honorable way to change the course of your life than resorting to criminality. Changing the course of our nature's future is something, an act your children will be proud of. Our hearts go out to the families who lost loved ones and the small businesses affected and livelihoods lost. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable Van der Merwe, who will join us on the virtual platform. The Honourable Van der Merwe.
Thank you very much, House Chairperson. House Chairperson, the anarchy we witnessed in KwaZulu-Natal and elsewhere after the ANC's internal war was unleashed against our nation was unspeakable. At some SASSA and social development offices and schools, nothing remained. Not a desk, nor a chair, not a sink, nor a water pipe. Not the electrical wiring, nor even a scrap of paper remained behind. Vehicles were stripped and burned, community support and feeding programs were destroyed, looters took days to remove everything, yet law enforcement officers were nowhere to be seen. Security at many schools were also visibly absent. At the very start of the civil unrest, our elder statesperson in this house, Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, sounded a warning when he said, and I quote, "Rogue and criminal elements, as well as an army of desperados who have nothing to lose in the face of poverty and unemployment, has unleashed anarchy." I urge our president to take a firm stand. If he does not act now and act decisively, all will be lost. Sadly, just like Prince Buthelezi warned, nobody in government acted decisively, nor swiftly, and in some instances, indeed, all was lost. In the aftermath, we lament the loss of jobs, the destruction of businesses, the damage to 139 schools, and the death of our compatriots. But just as painful is the question we have to answer today. Why was our government so slow to act when our country was burning? Waar was julle? As we speak, only 18 people have been arrested. Yet those in political power who instigated the crisis, those on social media who encouraged the flames of destruction, are still walking our streets. Why is it so difficult for our government to act against the criminals and the political thugs who committed treasonous economic sabotage against our state and our people? Why? As members of Parliament on the Social Development Portfolio Committee, we flew into KwaZulu-Natal long after the dust of this insurrection had settled. What we saw was akin to a war zone. In Umzinto, the bricks on the floor and the post boxes outside were the only indication that there once stood a post office that paid out social grants to the elderly and disabled. The impact on the most vulnerable was, and still is, unthinkable. There was no food on the shelves, shops were closed. Closed SASSA offices left many without grants. Public transport was either unaffordable or unavailable. But this human rights disaster, Chairperson, is still unfolding. 150,000 job losses mean another 150,000 struggling families. Add to that 80,000 COVID-19 orphans, 18 million grant recipients, millions more relying on the 350 grand grant alone for their survival, rising child malnutrition, and families on the verge of starvation. Ours, Chairperson, is a country aflame through poverty, joblessness, and despair. We hope that food parcels will indeed reach those that it's intended for and not politicians. Minister, we need greater support for NGOs and employ those thousands of social workers who are sitting at home. They are now needed more than ever before. Chairperson, we thank those who didn't let themselves be drawn into this anarchy. In particular, I thank the leadership of the IFP led by our President Emeritus, who themselves manned towns, streets, and shops throughout the night to safeguard our communities. Chairperson, it is very clear that South Africa can no longer afford unethical and accountable leadership. Ours is a country aflame with lawlessness, poverty, and despair. If we are to rescue South Africa from this downward spiral, our most powerful tool is the next election. The IFP will support these reports. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable
Chairperson.
Yes, Honourable Member.
Oh, God, the EFF is not called here. You called the IFP before the EFF.
Honourable Member, no name was submitted by the EFF for participation in this debate. However, I will incorporate it into the speakers list and I will call you after the Freedom Front Plus. The Honourable Boshoff.
Thank you, Honourable House Chair. The report we discussed today exposes more than we might have expected. Een ding wat uit die verslag blyk, is dat die orgie van plundering vir die ANC 'n nuwe sonnebok gegee het, waarop alle tekens van swak regering gewyd kan word. Die verslag meld meer as een keer dat die vandalisme wat by skole waargeneem is, oor maande of selfs jare plaasgevind het, voor die gekonsentreerde plundering van Julie 2021. Die middelpunt van die plundering was 14 Julie, 232 jaar na die Franse Revolusie ook op 14 Julie begin het. Interessante toeval, die ANC self 'n revolusionêre organisasie, eien graag die erfenis van die Franse Revolusie vir hulle self toe. Tog, teen hierdie tyd kan die ANC al as 'n soort Anshan regime bestempel word. Een wat so seker van sy posisie is dat die land se werklikhede en die rampspoedige gevolge van sy beleid vir homself eenvoudig onsigbaar is. Revolusionêre potensiaal neem toe na mate landsburgers verwyderd van hulle staatsinstellings voel. Wanneer skole, in hierdie voorbeeld, nie meer ons sin is nie, maar hulle sin. En as ons gefrustreerd is, haal ons dit op hulle skool uit. Al gaan ons kinders daar skool. Dit is wanneer 'n verslag lui dat vandalisme reeds oor 'n lang tydperk plaasgevind het en dat die een skool waar plunderaars wel vasgetrek is, dit toe leerlinge van die skool was. Hierdie verslag illustreer wat gebeur as 'n mens om 'n sekere doel te bereik 'n blikkie wurms oopmaak wat jy nooit weer kan toemaak. In die ANC se bevrydingsstryd is skoolkinders gemobiliseer en is elke skool 'n slagveld van bevryding genoem. Is skole geboikot en afgebrand omdat die skole wat hulle vir ons gee onvoldoende was, het onderwysstudente in revolusionêre ywer oortref om deel van die struggle te kan wees. Dit is die soort strategie om te volg as jy dink dat jy nooit sal slaag nie, dat jy nooit skole gaan bou en gehalte onderrig hoef te voorsien nie. Na 27 jaar van ANC-regering beveel die portefeulje komitee telkens aan dat beter sekuriteit by skole ontplooi moet word. Vanselfsprekend privaat, want die SAPD kan tog nie skole oppas nie. Transformasie en swart ekonomiese bemagtiging word dikwels deur ander ministers, minister Nzimande en Mantashe, agbare ministers geregverdig deur te verwys na die beleid wat gevolg is om die arm blanke vraagstuk op te los amper 'n eeu gelede. Vandag wil ek ook 'n bladsy uit daardie boek neem. Na die Tweede Vryheidsoorlog vanaf 1902 was daar vir Afrikaner kinders slegs Engelse skole waar hulle nie eers met mekaar Afrikaans kon praat nie en op baie maniere vir so 'n misstap verneder is. Die private inisiatief van Christelik nasionale skole was oor die algemeen finansiëel onlewensvatbaar en kinders moes noodgedwonge staatskole bywoon. Ten spyte daarvan is hulle steeds in hulle ouerhuise geleer om onderwysers te respekteer en die skool by te woon. Meer is dit, gemeenskap het moeite gedoen om daardie skole op te bou en uit te bou. Teen die tyd dat hulle politieke beheer kon oorneem, was 'n sterk positiewe onderwyskultuur stewig gevestig. Terwyl gehalte van onderrig verhoog is dit ook omskep in 'n meganisme om identiteit op te bou. Selfs nou, terwyl openbare skole die ANC-regering se instrumente vir ideologiese herprogrammering is, word Afrikaanse skole deur hulle gemeenskappe gekoester en uitgebou. Dat plunderaars in 2021 ook skole sou beroof en verniel, is ontstellend genoeg. Maar dat skole oor jare sodanig verniel is dat dit na die gevolg van plundering lyk, is nog erger. This report tells us what we should know about the ANC government. It came to power releasing a genie from a bottle which it can't put back. This erodes the government's ability to govern and to uplift. Inequality will continue to increase, where the haves will come from communities which value their schools, and the have-nots from those who don't. I thank you, Honourable Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I will now recognize the speaker from the EFF, the Honourable Mashabela. The speaker from the EFF. If that speaker is not available, then I'll proceed to the ACDP. The Honourable Soekers.
I'm available, Chair.
Honourable members.
Available.
Honourable members, order. The members are on the virtual platform. Honourable Soekers, I'm going to allow the EFF to proceed, and thereafter you will make your contribution. The EFF.
We note the reports of both social development and basic education on the impact of the civil unrest in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng, as well as the response to affected communities. Our analysis and characterization of what happened must not be a historical. Indeed, what happened in KZN and Gauteng happened 18 months after the poor who were already hard-pressed and injured the effects of lockdowns affecting the livelihoods and means to sustain their lives. This is why the popular characterization of the civil unrest as simply barbaric or an insurrection is a historical, unsophisticated, and dishonest. This narrative ignores the fact that half of South Africa's population lives in poverty. In December 2020, already approximately 9.34 million of South Africans faced high levels of severe food insecurity. Yesterday, we learned that unemployment has risen to almost 35% of the population, and that the real expanded definition of unemployment stands at over 44%. For young people, it stands at a shocking 57.47%, and these are mostly Black young people. They've been ejected by the education system and have nowhere else to go. In addition to the challenges of poverty and employment, there is also a long-standing challenge with income poverty in our country. and the extent to which the poorest people are unable to afford basic education, basic food. The consumer price inflation was at 6.8% year-on-year in May this year, from 6.7% year-on-year in April. And this translates into millions of people enduring the shame and despair of being unable to afford the most basic foods like bread, milk, and eggs. Chairperson, we indeed note the impact of the civil unrest, and the report details what the Portfolio Committee's oversight found in the affected communities and the urgent interim measures, but in the long term, to ensure that what happened does not happen again. Government must introduce a basic income support for the poor to address the chronic and racialized poverty in this country. South Africa needs a social protection instrument that will address the country's unemployment pandemic by assisting the poor aged 18 to 59 to have access to social security, including appropriate social assistance for those who are unable to support themselves and their dependents. The positive economic impact of such income support would boost purchasing power of the poorest, creating income multipliers by stimulating local economic growth and livelihoods. This will also have a direct impact on improving the quality of basic education outcomes and ensure that young people are focused on schooling and not on stressing about where their next plate of food will come from. Given the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdowns, which has affected low-paid and informal workers terribly, the interventions such as temporary employee relief scheme highlighted the long-standing chronic problems of poverty and unemployment. Chair, we further note that social development initially budgeted a mere 18 million for 2021-22 financial year for this social relief of distress and has requested additional funds amounting to 171 million, and that 66 million was used for food parcels, cash, and food vouchers in KZN. This is more reasons why government must implement a permanent income assistance, because we know what happens to food parcels in our communities. They are distributed functionally to ANC members and supporters, and this must come to an end. A permanent solution is the implementation of social assistance and work towards a universal basic income for all. We also know that while African children will be affected the most, the schools catering for white children and the children of the breeds are not affected much. That is why the response will be slow, because the children of ministers and members of parliament go to private schools, while the children of the poor will have their education compromised. The EFF called for the rollout of tablets a long time ago to facilitate online learning for all school-going children. If the Department of Education in Gauteng can have almost 500,000 to sanitize empty classrooms, we sure do have the money to buy learning aids for all our children. We reject this report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable Sukas.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chair, the mercy of God is keeping our nation. We today in this House and the rest of our nation have much to be thankful for. During the recent violent unrest and looting, his hand pulled us back from the brink of the abyss. When we consider the damage to property and vital infrastructure that are essential for service delivery in both Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, this may not seem as bad as what could have been. However, when considering both reports before this House, it is evident that we are continuing to edge closer to the abyss. The estimated cost to repair infrastructure in schools and the offices of social development in SASSA exceeds 100 million. However, during our oversight, we saw little evidence for the over 100 million that the KZN department requested or included in their budget. These departments, especially at provincial level, cannot continue to be a sieve in Afrikaans, through which public funds flow without tangible results or accountability. Social development in KZN is seeking more than 400 million for the cost of food relief alone. Is this genuine food relief? And who are the beneficiaries? Chairperson, I am of the opinion that we will see this vital relief tied to buying votes in the upcoming local government elections. Those who are planning to use food relief allocation to buy votes are also buying our people's dignity and at the same time selling out our democracy. How can we condemn a mother looting a packet of maize meal and some clothes for her children when on the other hand, we allow government departments to loot the fiscus of hundreds of millions? Unless food relief is backed up by changes to policy that will get people out of a state of dependency and into independence, we are stealing people's dignity in another way. Chairperson, we do not need government to create jobs. We need government to work with business and civil society to create an enabling and stable environment that will create jobs and give our people back their dignity. The cost reported and presented by the KZN Province of Education of over 100 million to school infrastructure and the cause of damage that we saw does not correlate with this report. It is up to the House to be the vanguard to defend the dignity of our people by turning over every cent that this government spends several times before it is spent. Our weapons in this fight are oversight visits, the report of these in this House and the debates in this House. These reports underline the need for us to strengthen oversight and demand clarity in reporting. This we must execute to the best of our ability, Chair. The ACDP supports both these reports. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable Sibisi.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. We recently learned that taxpayers are set to cough up an estimated 138,258 schools damaged during the mass looting and damage to property.
Honourable Sibisi, we can't hear you properly. Can you just increase the volume of your voice, please? Speak louder.
Thank you, Chair. The amount is in addition to costs to be incurred to repair other schools vandalized since the outbreak of COVID-19 in March 2020, and the money spent to buy mobile classrooms. In KwaZulu-Natal alone, 144 schools, 8 education circuit management office, and 3 education centers were verified as being damaged. The estimated cost stood at 100,362,000 after verification showed 144 schools were in fact damaged. South Africans need to understand that the vandalism of schools and public properties cripple the future of this country. Which are the learners who are attending these schools today? These affected schools have pupil enrollment ranging between 411 and 2,245. It was no surprise that the province had insufficient budget to implement rehabilitation and refurbishment of school infrastructure. Because our country is on the verge of a fiscal cliff, if we have not yet fallen off that cliff. In Gauteng alone, 14 schools were damaged and the estimated cost was 38 million. Since the inception of COVID-19 last year, a total of 401 schools have been affected by arson, vandalism, and break-ins. A total of 54 schools were affected in the 2021 academic year with an estimated of 53 million. These costs were not planned nor budgeted for by the department. We must be mindful of the fact that while the damages were taking place in the two provinces, more than 1,700 schools were still being repaired from damages since the COVID-19 outbreak. The total number of schools vandalized since 2020 March across the country stood at 1,882 as of now. House Chair, this is extremely concerning because the exponential costs are beyond monetary cost of repairs. We as the National Freedom Party call upon all South Africans to stand up alongside government to fight against perpetrators that damage public infrastructure that serves to advance our people. We cannot sit back and watch people vandalize and damage schools and clinics. These are structures that serve communities. Government alone cannot effectively put an end to this. Communities and the public at large needs to step up to put an end to this pandemic. This is a matter that requires all of us to work together to put back this to an end. The IFP will support the report. Thank you.
Yes, the member is from the NFP. It was a temporary lapse, honorable members.
We welcome him. It's fine.
Yeah, did you say IFP?
He did, but it's fine. He can come back.
Thank you, honorable members. The next speaker is the Honorable Deputy Minister of Basic Education on the virtual platform.
House Chair, thank you very much for this opportunity. Greetings to you. Greetings to the Minister of Social Development, Honorable Lindwe Zulu, and other ministers who are present, Chairperson and members of the Portfolio Committee for Basic Education, South Africans, Sanbonan. Chair, July saw our country experiencing unrest and unprecedented looting, coupled with vandalism never imagined in democratic South Africa. President Cyril Ramaphosa, in addressing the nation, characterized the events as follows. These actions are intended to cripple the economy, cause social instability, and severely weaken or even dislodge the democratic state. They have sought to exploit the social and economic conditions under which many South Africans live, conditions that have worsened since onset of the coronavirus pandemic and to provoke ordinary citizens and criminal network to engage in opportunistic acts of looting. Our sector, basic education, was not spared by these actions as we suffered damages in a number of schools due to vandalism. About more than 200 in both the educational institutions and learning centers in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. This was really an unfortunate situation as we planned to normalize schooling in this academic year. Let me join the many progressive voices in our country who commended the communities who stood up in protection of their country, their economy, and educational infrastructure. Want to thank the people from taxi industries, want to thank business people and many South Africans who stood up to say, not in our name and not our country. Both education MECs in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng continue to work very hard to ensure the restoration of our schools for teaching and learning. House Chair, today we are here to respond as a sector directly to the oversight report of the joint committees, which makes important reflections and insightful recommendations in the areas of school safety, the involvement of communities and their structures in the culture of teaching and learning, recovery of infrastructure and psychosocial support, amongst others. Allow me at this moment to thank the members of the oversight of the Portfolio Committee for their oversight role, which adds foot soldiers in our battle to ensure that no child is left behind and that education is a societal matter. As part of the executive, we must provide the National Assembly oversight bodies with correct information necessary for them to play their oversight role. For our democracy to succeed, we must be held accountable and report to the people of South Africa. Our system of governance places emphasis on the separation of powers. Thus, we respect the exclusive powers of the oversight bodies. House Chair, as we know, we have collated information on all vandalized schools across the country, but we focused on the most affected provinces, that is KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. As I speak to you right now, we have a complete list of vandalized schools in each province, the extent of the damage and the cost estimates. We have developed plans to rehabilitate the vandalized schools, and in some cases, work has been completed. In cases where repairs are still in progress, we are providing temporary relief to school where required. These temporary measures include relocating learners from nearby schools during the renovation and during the renovations. So they are taken to the nearby schools. In the meantime, we have also given permission to the non-Section 21 schools to use allocated funds for norms and standards to employ security personnel. As part of our response, we also focus on broader infrastructure challenges such as shortages of classrooms, water, and sanitation. We encourage communities to take an active interest in the safety of their schools. We have since consulted with school governing bodies to also provide extra eyes and muscles in the prevention of efforts. We want the SGBs and their school safety committees to take the critical constitutional role to enhance community safety strategies. In the long term, as a sector, we maintain and sustain established structures on an ongoing basis, including the institutionalization of the quality learning and teaching campaign structures. Obviously, we need a comprehensive security plan for all our schools. We have made a clarion call for all our structures to reignite and adopt a COP plan at the local level. We have reactivated the Adopt a School program for traditional leaders and the business community. We have also called upon Community Policing Forum to work with school governing bodies and the school safety committees to link in with every school to a police officer at a nearest police station. We strengthen and activate the social cluster communication plan in partnership with GCIS, utilization of print, radio, digital, social media to address toxic political rhetoric that makes our schools easy targets in misguided political games. Through this communication intervention, we are addressing the orchestrated misinformation that causes despair and hopelessness, which elevates schools to legitimate targets. At the center of the communication plan is to reignite the love and respect for schools and schooling as a societal activity. We have already conducted a communication briefing with key stakeholders, educators, parents, and safety and security agencies. We have unrestrained dialogues with faith-based organizations and traditional leaders to join our call to action to protect our community assets. Our strategy is one message, many voices. Once the COVID-19 restrictions allows, we are going back and to resuscitate community imbizos to dialogue on the importance of protecting community assets, of which schools form prominent part. The destruction of school property hurts learners, both in school and long term. It doesn't help, Chair, that we are dealing with the scourge of vandalism while battling with a global pandemic of COVID-19. We're already beginning to feel the full impact of young people not having access to learning and teaching. But in the main, young people are missing their developmental milestone that depend on social interaction and activities. We are doing everything in our power within the available resources to support learners through social services. House Chair, the one big challenge is how to sustain our flagship pro-poor interventions such as the National School Nutrition Program when the site is vandalized and thus out of action. I can confirm that despite the challenges, the National School Nutrition Program continues to provide meals to over 9 million learners. All vandalized schools have functioning alternative school nutrition feed scheduled. In all affected schools, the extent of damage or loss has been assessed. We have since provided supplementary items such as kitchens and food preparation facilities equipped and utensils where required. We have replenished the lost or damaged items within available resources and supplier contracts reactivated. We communicated with the National School Nutrition suppliers in line with their contractual obligation, of course, for immediate delivery of food before schools reopened in the context of partial or destroyed sites. Where the school kitchen was destroyed and learners were relocated, the school nutrition program followed the relocated learners. In the medium term, we are developing annual provincial business plan with funding to replenish equipment and utensils lost or damaged. We are reviewing the template for inventory in the National School Nutrition. We will send a circular to affected schools advising them on alternative measures and a revised menu to learners to be provided in the interim. We will continue to monitor, report, and respond to schools with remaining challenges to ensure that our children are fed. We encourage schools and provinces to solicit donations from private businesses for mobile kitchens, for schools where the kitchens were totally damaged, because these people were targeting the damage. I hear people saying it's because they are hungry, but when you are hungry, you cannot steal from the poor also, and you steal because you are hungry. And we cannot, as this house, support stealing and say because people are hungry. Chair, in conclusion, we appreciate the work of this committee. We'll do everything legally permissible to support the work of the portfolio committee and the support that we receive from the portfolio committee. Thank you so much, House Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Deputy Minister. The next speaker is the Honorable Stock.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. One of the mammoth and important commitment that this government has made is to empower people to lift themselves out of poverty while creating adequate social nets to protect the most vulnerable in society. We do so because we are fully alive to the realities on the ground and which are confronted by our ordinary people. We are also fully committed to restoring the dignity of our people on the ground and in society at large. The ANC continues to implement social protection policy interventions and related anti-poverty strategies to contribute in the development of our people. As the ANC, we are vehemently condemning the unprecedented violent protests that happened over a 2-week period that not only threatened the delivery of the key socio-economic activities and services throughout the country, in particular in KZN and Gauteng, but also threatened our food security system. It is important to highlight that the closure of even one of our social development offices brings so much distress to those that are in need to access their social services in KwaZulu-Natal and throughout the country and in Gauteng as well. That is why we were distressed and discomforted when we were alerted to the vandalization and looting of offices in both these provinces, because social development services are crucial and critical to the daily function of our ordinary people. This had a direct impact on the Department of Social Development because of its mandate to provide social protection services to all our communities. The majority of local social development offices in KZN and Gauteng had to be shut down due to the road blockages, vandalism of offices, and stolen of equipment. In some instances, files were stolen in the offices where we were told during the oversight that people arrived, the community arrived, and they went straight to the 5th floor to go and get the key and stole the files. Is that right? Is that why some of us members are actually encouraging this looting? Is it out of anger that somebody gets into an office, goes straight to the 5th floor, go and steal a file? Is that because of hunger? That's a question that we need to answer. This means that most vulnerable people were not able to access the services. This provided impetus for the committee to conduct oversight visits to these provinces to ascertain the impact of the violent protests on the delivery of social services, as well as the department's response to the protest and to the provision of urgent food relief security. Honorable members, we must commend the interim interventions that have been put in place by the Department of Social Development, most especially the decision to provide services for the affected communities through the deployment of mobile offices and the deployment of staff personnel to other social development offices. Honorable members, we must convey that we cannot afford or fathom how people can cause destruction to infrastructure, to their own services. And after that, some members of the House claim that it's right because they were hungry. that action or such narrative cannot be condemned, cannot be condoned. It must be condemned. It must be condemned with the necessary contempt it deserves. We are cognizant that protests came about in some instances due to long protracted grievances, but we must, as the people rise above destroying the very same infrastructure that is meant to be a resource and a tool of development to our people. In our robust and fruitful engagements as a committee with the various stakeholders, we noted that the department must ensure that psychosocial support to deal with trauma must be given attention, to deal with the issue of anxiety and adjustment issues through wellness programs for employees affected by the destruction of property and looting that occurred in the two different provinces. It must also ensure that staff members from affected local offices are deployed temporarily to other provincial social development offices. The department must ensure that it realigns its systems with SASSA in order to address the issue of double dipping with regard to the distribution of food parcels and the food vouchers. The provincial social development departments should review and reallocate budgets for procurement of assets and infrastructure repairs to the local offices that were affected by these protests. There should be a consideration of adopting a food parcel model used by the Gauteng Department of Social Development and roll out to other provinces throughout the country. Honorable Chairperson, a significant engagement that needs to be accelerated is the entire reconsideration of our food security response mechanism to meet the demands of our people on the ground. This also goes into the core of developing sustainable ways in which our people can and must be skilled to sustainably cultivate their own food security systems and gardens. We must express gratitude to the communities that came out in their numbers to condemn these protests, the looting and destruction of our property. These people demonstrated indeed that in action, the significance of our social mobilization and the resilience to stand against anything that causes pain and suffering to others of our country can be confronted throughout the country. Honorable members, the committee commits to periodically monitor the interventions and responses by the Department of Social Development on the key issues raised by stakeholders during our oversight visit in KZN and Gauteng. We reaffirm that as a committee we will continue to ensure that the social policies and interventions that are implemented continue to lift and protect our people as we advance a better life for all. I thank you, Honorable Member. Thanks.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The next speaker is the Honorable Hendricks.
Huisvoorsitter, dit was 'n verrassing om te hoor van die opstand van die gepeupel in Frankryk op die 14de Julie en die verengelsing van die Afrikaners in Suid-Afrika en dat Afrikaners vandag die victims is. Afrikaners is 10 keer meer ryker na 27 jaar van bevryding. Die bevrydingsbeweging het meer vir Afrikaners te doen as die Engelse en baie van hulle het geluister na die agbare Wynand Boshoff. Afrikaners moet liewer nou stem vir die ANC of die PAC of die EFF en die IFP. Ek weet nie, die NFP weet nie aan wie hulle behoort nie, so ek kan nie dit aanbeveel nie. Honorable Chair, we have two caring ministers working against all odds, and what they have done soon after the unrest must be commended. Al-Jamaa and his constituency have supplemented the efforts to provide food parcels, cooking and dishing out the food, and providing 1 month supply of nutritional powder pack where it was needed. The Department of Social Welfare has a problem in giving PR councillors food parcels to distribute and should have in their budget line items to assist parliamentary constituency officers. This will increase the footprint for relief, and this will make President Ramaphosa happy as he promised a hot plate of food for everyone even before the unrest. The sooner Basic Education Department switch solely to online learning like the University of Cape Town has for learners, the better. This department is not showing innovation and leadership, especially now after the unrest, and cannot tell this House that they have a revolutionary program. This department still have anti-revolutionary learner-educator ratios. Now with COVID classrooms, because of these high ratios, are death traps. A curriculum that does not lead to a certificate opening doors for jobs is worse than Bantu education. A curriculum that is not loaded with digital education, Internet of Things, robotics, artificial intelligence is nothing but Bantu education and colored education as we know it. Employees want all of these skills before they employ you. The basic education department train learners for stay in their jobs, stone age jobs and not jobs arising out of new generation jobs and new revenue streams. Honorable Chair, would like to thank the honorable members who went on the oversight visit and reporting to us in this House. Al-Jama votes in favor of the report.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The next speaker is the Honorable Nodada.
Lalo Malunga Begegleo, fellow South Africans, Molweni. The unrest 42 days ago painted a stark picture of the out-of-touch ANC government's failures, exacerbated by the factional battles that have left 30 million South Africans living under $1 a day, unable to even buy a loaf of bread. While the expanded youth unemployment rate is rising at 75%, you guys are making a noise, yeah? 8 million of youth not in education, employment, or training, many of whom have dropped out of the education system that is not conducive for learning and confines them to a lifetime of poverty and unemployment. Furthermore, we witnessed the complete failure of the South African Police Service in protecting citizens and public property. The Department of Basic Education has faced an increased threats of vandalism and theft mainly during lockdown, school holidays, and more recently in the unrest in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. Meanwhile, the ANC has cut 1.9 billion from the department's budget to fund failed SOEs, yet there are still over 3,000 pit toilets in schools, mud and asbestos schools that need to be eradicated. With an already tight budget to these cuts, the department now has to redirect funds to all these vandalized schools instead of getting rid of mud, asbestos structures, and pit toilets. During the unrest, 137 schools in KZN were either looted or burnt to ashes. Over 11 schools in Gauteng were targeted by syndicates and vandalized, many being repeat incidences because the police never have investigated or followed up on those cases. Both provinces will cost the department a whopping 141 million to repair and rebuild damaged school infrastructure at the expense of the mud, asbestos, and pit toilet schools that need help. Nationally, during the lockdown, from March to date, 1,882 schools have been damaged, costing the department over 226 million. All at the expense of many schools, again, that have mud, asbestos, and pit toilets. Main areas that are targeted are
Honorable Nodada, can you just give me a moment, please? Honorable Moss at the back. While interjections are allowed, you cannot just deliver commentary as the speaker is speaking. So please let us observe the rules of the House. And even though we may disagree with what the Honorable Member at the podium is saying, let's do so in a respectful manner. The Honorable Nodada.
Of the 1,882 schools that have been damaged, costing the department over 200 million, 1,700 of them are still under repairs till date. Main areas that are targeted and looted are ICT administration equipment, food for the National School Nutrition Program, copper and plumbing material. Some schools are simply arson attacks. It is sad to see that in Sikululwe Secondary School, a whole admin block and science lab was simply burned with nothing stolen. The most heartbreaking was the looted, vandalized Golden Step Special School in Verelem, with damages of over 3 million, and due to the unrest, till today, that school remains closed, denying these children with special needs their right to education. The picture in Gauteng is a bit different, with syndicate attacks that target ICT smart boards, computers, food, and copper pipes. There were criminally planned attacks on schools. The most interesting part is that all of these schools are repeat incidences And despite reporting cases to the SAPS, nothing has been investigated, nothing has been followed up on, and these cases continue to just hang in the balance. The MEC in Gauteng even came and said to us that we are completely losing the war against vandalism unless these targeted plans on security are put in place and the SAPS follow up on these cases. It's your person. SAPS more generally has been inefficient at curbing crime and more inefficient in holding looters accountable. As a result, many schools visited have faced repeat incidences and the SAPS hasn't done anything about that. Minister Cele, it was all fun and games beach while surfers were trying to go to the beach. You're very quick to get there. However, you continue to completely fail at catching criminals, let alone process those reported cases in schools. The Department of Basic Education is not a crime prevention unit. I think you should start doing your job. At the DA, we have proposed that the provincial departments must ensure that schools use their norms and standards effectively to repair the damages. We have further said Minister Mochecha and DBE must engage provincial departments of education, public works, the security cluster to come up with a circuit or district-based safety and security plan or insurance plans, particularly in hotspots, despite government being a self-insurer. Based on this, SAPS needs to be informed and provided additional protection, night guards, and visible policing, particularly in hotspots. DBE must allocate patrollers like in the Western Cape, which has been cited as an effective way of curbing vandalism and theft in schools. And the DGG came to the portfolio committee and indicated this, and Gauteng now is following this, and we're encouraged that they also adopt this moving forward. DBE must make closed-circuit TV cameras and alarms a standard in all hotspot schools with off-site storage of footage in collaboration with SAPS. Promotion of community responsibility is of utmost importance. Therefore, DBE must work with community stakeholders, parents, and security cluster to ensure that they are neighborhood watchers with regards to protecting schools. In conclusion, as the DA, we are calling on
Ngada. From KwaZulu.
Public property.
No, just you have a few seconds left, but there's a mark on the platform that is disrupting the member, and there's another microphone on of another member. Mahlo, those on the virtual platform, please ensure that your microphones stay muted until you are recognized. Arunodwada, can you just complete your speech, please?
Thanks, Chair. In conclusion, as a DA, we're calling on South Africans not to take out frustrations on burning and looting schools or public property. There can be no justification for such criminal behavior because schools are there to serve our communities. It's time South Africans take their protest to the ballot box like the unemployed young people of Zambia who wore their graduation gowns to vote for change. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable Minister of Social Development. The Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, House Chairperson, honourable members, ministers and deputy ministers, abakhona namhlanje kule ndlu, acting chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Social Development, Honourable Dikgang Stock, siyabonga namhlanje uqalile umsebenzi wakho kakuhle. Members of the Portfolio Committee on Social Development, honourable members, fellow South Africans across the length and breadth of our country, ngibingelela bonke abasemakhaya, ngibingelela nabakakhulukazi abangale ngasekhaya KwaZulu, ngithi kubo sisekhona, siyasebenza, sisebenzela umphakathi, imiphakathi yonke, whether sise Eastern Cape or sise Northern Cape or KwaZulu-Natal, sila siwuhulumente ka-African National Congress ukuze sikwazi ukulungisa konke okungathi kuyaphuma kube yizigwegwe ngesinye isikhathi. Thank you for the opportunity to reply on this important debate on the report of the Portfolio Committee on Social Development on the adverse and impact of the recent incidents of civil unrest on the social development services in parts of KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng provinces. and the responses of the department for urgent food relief to the affected communities. Minister we Social Development, ngicela ukubonga nanokuthi i-department ye-basic education nayo ikhona namhlanje because suhulumente oyedwa, we are one government and we work together. And so when such reports are being presented, we not only look at our reports from a point of view of social development, but we look at the reports together. House Chairperson, may this debate be among the reminders that ours is a democracy in its formative development years. Ukhona abaphikayo abacabanga ukuthi 27 years isikhathi eside kakhulu ukuthi silungise okwakwenzeka ngakithi kwenziwa i-apartheid, and that every South African wants to meaningfully participate in shaping this new South Africa we are talking about. Likewise, this occasion must be the most immediate reminder of how fatal and disabling our pre-democracy conflicts molded our commitments to protect our common heritage, South Africa, and her people's collective interests. Ngicela ukubonga futhi House Chairperson ukuthi umuntu wathola ithuba lokuthi ahambe naye together with i-department, together with i-portfolio committee ne-department sayozibonela ngawethu amehlo ukuthi kwenzakalani ukuze sikwazi ukuthi silungise lezo zigwegwe la zenzeke khona. Ngicela ukubonga ukuthi i-portfolio committee iyasinikeza ithuba siyi-department nami nguminister ukuthi sihambe nabo noma sazi nje ukuthi umsebenzi wabo i-oversight, kodwa sabona ukuthi kungcono ukuthi sihambe nabo so that sizibonele into abayibonayo nathi sibe siyayibona. It is this backdrop of lived experiences that consciously informed our resolve to break away from the monstrous past and build a democratic society, a democracy wherein the laws and institutions permit for dissenting voices and grievances to be given due audience. It is here where the people have sufficient space within which they can build the South Africa we want. Now is the time for us to unite and fight anarchy and destruction and any negativity where it rears its ugly head. It is our collective responsibility to do that. The constructive recommendations must be towards reinforcing our multiple efforts that are targeted at improving human levels outcomes amongst our people. To this extent, and working together with MECs for social development, namely MEC Murakane Mosupie of Gauteng province and MEC Nonhlanhla Khoza of KwaZulu-Natal, and notwithstanding the security and resources constraints, the department and its entities, SASSA and NDA, are embodying the call that the state of our people, lives and livelihoods in the different constituencies in these provinces must be improved. As have been confirmed by Stats SA, the National Income Dynamics Study Coronavirus Rapid Mobile Survey and the Human Science Research Council reports, among others, unemployment, food insecurity, and hunger have worsened since the advent of the coronavirus 2019. While government and the social partners have been directing resources and energies towards co-creating and providing services to the communities that are affected by the COVID-19, the outbreak of these incidents of unrest in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng provinces only exacerbated the unbearable conditions of vulnerability in the affected communities. In parts, these incidents served as to reverse some of the gains we have made in the eradication of challenges such as hunger and inequalities, particularly resulting from the implementation of the COVID-19 SRD between May 20 to April 21. Honorable members will recall that precisely stemming from these incidences, President Ramaphosa reinstated the 350 grant. True to the nature of the mandate of the department, our response to these incidences of civil unrest touch the entire spectrum of our programs, including the collaboration of community impact data through working together with municipalities and the two provinces, social mobilization, the assessment of vandalism, damage and theft at our services infrastructure, especially SASSA local offices and the branches of the South African Post Office, where grant beneficiaries collect their grants. This is important in light of the need for continuity of services to South Africans. The provision of psychosocial support, the rendering of child protection services, the provision of social relief of distress, which we call SRD, to those who are assessed to need it, and the rebuilding and sustainable livelihoods in the affected communities. But while there are areas of public life where we have made a decisive break with the apartheid past, we all know very well that this country's divided and violent history lives in our lives of millions of South Africans. It is for this reason also that we have to work towards behavioral change while appreciating the challenges that are faced by our people. Through reinvigorated people, public, private, civic, academic, multilateral partnership, the department's programs continue to be responsive while new interventions are emerging. Donors, non-profit organizations, business and universities are becoming part of these emerging partnership innovations that are necessary to undo the adversities that these incidents of civil unrest have brought into the lives of our ordinary people. The departmental interventions include the provision of food through center-based feeding program, including early childhood development, ECD facilities, community nutrition development centers, CNDCs, drop-in centers, home community-based care, and old age homes. These are funded by the department to implement food-related interventions, among others. Since the advent of the incidents of unrest, over 12,149 food parcels were issued in Gauteng province, feeding over 62,509 people that were adversely affected. Over the same period, an additional 100,430 people received meals from CNDCs. In KwaZulu, food relief was provided through the center-based feeding program and social relief of distress by the department and SASSA. To date, 42,573 people were provided with food at the CNDCs in that province, while 36,734 SRD vouchers were provided to the people affected. I also do want to respond to the issue which was raised by Member Sekers about the 400 million that was requested by KwaZulu-Natal. I do want to indicate that that 400 million is not just the money for responding to food and food shortages. That money is also going to be dealing with the infrastructure and equipment which were destroyed at that time. And in my view, this amount of money will have to stretch it as much as they possibly can to cover, because we're not only talking about food shortages here, we are talking about infrastructure that was destroyed and has to be replaced. The department has requested additional funding from the Solidarity Fund, which is 100 million already pledged, to address the food challenges in the two provinces. This support will, among others, target workers that have been laid off from industries that have closed down, households with a total income below the food poverty line of 585 a month, applicants of social relief of distress administered by the department. The provinces started to implement the response measures on the 16th of August 2021. Government is making a call for active citizenship that is targeted at community sustainability, where food security, the well-being of South Africans, and nation building are concerned. Within that frame, we encourage the establishment of targeted people, public, private, civic, academic, multilateral partnership among all concerned. As we look ahead, this debate is offering our collective as South Africans the opportunity to practically reflect and co-create and realize our foremost priority of engaging the state of our people through the implementation of meaningful interventions. I thank you.
Thank you. Honourable members, that concludes the debate. Are there any objections to the adoption of the report of the Portfolio Committee on Social Development on the impact of civil unrest in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng on social development services and the Department of Social Development's response for urgent food relief to the affected communities? Are there any objections?
Please
No
note
objection.
the objection of the EFF.
The objection of the EFF is noted. Are there any further objections? There's no further objections. The report is thus agreed to. Are there any objections to the adoption of the report of the Portfolio Committee on Basic Education on the joint oversight visit with a select committee on
The objection of the EFF.
Sports, Arts and Culture to KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng Provincial Education Departments? Are there any objections?
Please note the objection of the EFF.
The objection is noted, and with that objection, the report is agreed to. The Secretary will read the third and fourth orders together.
Consideration of report of Portfolio Committee on Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development on special joint oversight visit to KwaZulu-Natal with Select Committee on Land Reform, Environment, Mineral Resources and Energy, and consideration of report of Portfolio Committee on Environment, Forestry and Fisheries on oversight visit to KwaZulu-Natal on 11 to 12 August.
I now invite the Honourable Mandela as the first speaker to this report.
Honorable Chairperson, allow me to dedicate this speech to Pavita Terokaran, who was executed on this Women's Month. We meet at a time that as a nation we are faced with great challenges amidst growing economic pressures, the ongoing heavy material and human cost extracted from us by COVID-19 pandemic and the recent failed attempted insurrection and the loss of life, property, and fear that has followed in its wake. We stand proud that as a nation, we have united to protect our democracy, our freedom, and our peace. South Africans are no strangers to the challenges, and we have stepped away from brinkmanship and end games before. Perhaps the most encouraging aspect of the recent meltdown was the way South Africans rallied together, supporting each other, keeping communities safe, and refusing to be sucked into the spiraling chaos. It was also encouraging to see South Africans responding to the founding father of our nation, President Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela's rallying call when he said, I quote, "Together, we will work to support courage where there is fear, foster agreement where there is conflict, and inspire hope where there is despair," close quote. Whilst the damage done to South Africa's global image sent shivers down the spines of investors, global institutions, and peace-loving people of the world, it was the response to President Ramaphosa's call for calm that was heeded, rather than the proclivity to loot because of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. It was heartening that traditional leaders rose to the occasion and supported the president's call and rallied deep rural communities to disassociate from the mayhem, not to be part of the violence and destruction. South African leaders from across the political and religious spectrum were the voices of reason emanating from communities across the length and breadth of our country. We stood as one and refused to be strung along by agent provocators, hell-bent on setting South Africa on fire and attempting to orchestrate a situation of ungovernability. We owe it to ourselves and the nation never to stoke the fires of racial tensions and discontent. No leader in this august house should ever engage in fueling the embers of racial conflicts, tension between communities, and any acts that detract from social cohesion, unity, and peace. In the wake of the national crisis, we must focus on prosecuting the criminal elements behind the violence and looting. They must be held accountable as their actions cause loss of many lives, destruction of property and livelihoods, and incalculable damage to many sectors of our economy. The impact of the unrest in the agricultural sector had a negative impact on historically disadvantaged communities. The small-scale farmers, working class, and poor have borne the brunt of the consequences of such unrest in the sector. The agricultural sector was hit the most, and the impact was hard felt by small-scale producers within the sector. This occurred through the destruction of crops and the lack of processing facilities for crops. Grazing was destroyed for animal farmers, and the supply of feed was delayed due to the risk posed to the supply of logistics. The negative effects of the unrest also created hardships for the affected communities, resulting in increased unemployment and its accompanying economic impact on historically disadvantaged communities. It is commendable that many communities in support of our ANC-led government and its transformation program opposed the unrest and defended their property and jobs and loudly said, "Not in our name." These communities defended their constitutional right and our democracy. Agriculture is a time-bound industry, and the unrest also negatively impacted upon processing facilities for agriculture. This led to losses for sugar cane farmers and animal farmers. Processing facilities, including cold storage facilities, were affected by the fact that workers were unable to report to work. The disruption of agricultural sector supply chain occurred in all parts of the value chain, as the agricultural sector is dependent on processing facilities, wholesale and retail. The destruction of retail sector has had a negative impact on the sector, as farming is dependent on large-scale retail store for the purchase and the sale of agricultural products. The ports were also unable to process import and exports for many days. However, many of the processing facilities reopened and the ports have resumed exports of agricultural products. Farming and the supply value chain have not as yet recovered, and this requires support, effort, and time. As a collective, we must come to the terms with the reality of systemic poverty, inequality, and unemployment. We can neither wish this away, nor will it disappear by itself. In that context, we welcome President Ramaphosa's Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan as an important step in the right direction. This oversight visit was insightful in three very distinctive ways: that our agricultural sector was impacted with disruption of agricultural value chain and logistics. Secondly, impact small-scale farmers and feed supply. Thirdly, the impact on quality of life of rural communities as a result of destruction of infrastructure and the attendant loss of jobs. We will have to take extraordinary measures to get the affected sectors of agriculture, industry back on track. Finally, honorable members, we appeal to South Africans to rally together to overcome the scourge of poverty, eradicate inequality, and to address unemployment through stimulating SMMEs as the engine room for new growth and renewed hope. Together, we can do it. I move for the adoption of this report on the oversight visit to KwaZulu-Natal by the Portfolio
Thank you,
Committee of
Honourable Member.
Agriculture,
The
Land
time has
Reform and
expired.
Rural Development.
Thank
I
you.
thank you.
I now recognize Honourable Masipa.
And Modula Stulo, the oversight report before the House today is born out of an unprecedented campaign of politically sponsored unrest that took place in the province of KwaZulu-Natal. From the brief that both the provincial MEC and the national minister gave us, the summary was as follows. For each misunderstanding of the ANC government, the farmers paid a full price. For each blunder and miscalculation of the ANC government, the farmers paid a full price. For each fault and inaccuracy of the ANC government, the farmers paid a full price. The consumers are already paying a heavy price. The poor and food insecure are the victims. The unemployed now face an even gloomy future. While ANC factional battles played out over former president, it was farmers who bore the brunt of the upheaval and dysfunctional police service. Farmers informed the committee about their financial losses due to lack of market access necessitated by road closures, burning and looting. Farmers are bearing the brunt of the failures of the ANC government. If they're not victims of senseless and brutal murders, their fields are burned, their animals are butchered, and their equipment are vandalized. My leader, John Steenhuisen, was the first on the ground during the looting. And Honorable Steyn and I did a follow-up visit to farmers. My oversight visit before committee's oversight visit revealed that there was no active biosecurity on the ground. Biosecurity is now receiving the attention. This is what we mean by the DA difference. I'm extremely concerned about the department's neglect of this important biosecurity function. The committee was presented with an estimated budget of 1 billion that farmers will need to address the financial losses caused by ANC-sponsored riots. I asked for a detailed report on how the provincial department arrived at the figures. To date, we did not receive anything. There was clear evidence of poor coordination between the district and provincial and national government. As the saying goes, the right does not know what the left is doing. The National Department official informed this committee that 80% of meat being consumed in South Africa is being imported. Clearly, the national government is failing to comprehend its own agricultural figures. Who is to trust? Farmers are experiencing pure ANC government land reform problems. The DA condemns politically sponsored violence in the agricultural sector. They must stop. The DA calls on KZN senior government officials to support the junior officials on the ground and help improve foot and mouth biosecurity management. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Masipa. I now invite Honourable Paulson. Honourable Paulson.
Thank you, House Chair. Chairperson, the recent unrest in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng, while precipitated by the arrest of Mr. Zuma, were essentially about the failures of the post-1994 government in an indictment on the ruling elites that 27 years after the attainment of political freedom, that the country has not managed to make any headway in reversing the material legacy of colonialism and apartheid. The only thing that changed is the administration, but South Africa is still a colonial and apartheid society in every possible way. What happened in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng should be a stern warning to both the ruling elites and the capitalist bosses that the people are going to get that the people are getting tired of being excluded, and soon enough, no soldiers or police will ever be able to stop the starving poor from eating the rich. The disturbance that the unrest had on agriculture is severe, but it also provides a window of opportunity to restructure the entire agricultural value chain, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal, where black people are still on the margin of key industries, such as the sugarcane industry, while there are institutions such as SAFDA in KZN, working towards improving the conditions of emerging producers in the province. The majority of farmers and those involved in the value chain are still white and heavily supported by the government. The government must prioritize providing support to affected emerging farmers and ensure that these farmers are able to produce again. We are also concerned with the impact the unrest had on the environment. The impact the unrest had, and in particularly the burning of United Phosphorus Limited warehouse in KZN, may have long-lasting environmental and health impact on the surrounding communities. UPL was part of a special fast-track economic investment scheme by the national government with no specific environmental or hazardous substance approvals or any local government scrutiny. Other than squandering our taxes with these concessions, this ANC government violated the Occupational Health and Safety Act and put the neighbouring communities and workers at risk. President Cyril Ramaphosa said that as part of the government's economic reconstruction and recovery plan, there would be a massive rollout of infrastructure that would completely transform the landscape of our cities, towns and rural areas. The transformation in the environmental landscape caused by the explosion at the UPL facility in Durban is not the transformation we need. What we got is a mini Chernobyl disaster thanks to the ANC. That UPL warehouse is our Chernobyl, although the Chernobyl disaster was as a result of failure during a safety test on a nuclear reactor. The impact of the UPL disaster on the environment is just devastating. The fire at the UPL warehouse situated upstream of the Oshlanga River and the Blackburn village informal settlement in close proximity to a retail hub and a primary school waged for 10 days. The 14,000 square meter warehouse held millions of liters of chemicals, some classified as harmful, toxic or very toxic. The impact on the environment, aquatic and human life is almost unimaginable. As much as UPL should bear the cost for its negligence, we must not allow this corrupt ANC government to escape accountability for ultimately allowing UPL to operate without complying with the necessary legislative requirements. The residents and the businesses of Kanubia and eThekwini must express their utter disgust with the corrupt ANC government on the 27th of October 2021, who has traded their quality of life for mere kickbacks. The EFF rejects this report with the contempt that it deserves. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honourable Paulson. And I invite Honourable Singh.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chairperson. Sorry for that. Chairperson, let me start off by saying IFP leaders were also on the ground, like some other leaders have been mentioned in the House. And we were actually preaching and promoting peace amongst communities that suffered losses and loss of lives in the Phoenix, Bambai, Amaoti, and Zwelisha areas. In fact, the IFP, through its leader, Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, translated words into tangible action when we visited 29 families that lost loved ones during the unrest in the Phoenix, Bambai, Amaoti areas. And we gave them what is called amakhandlela. I think you'll understand what I mean, Honorable Chairperson, amakhandlela, which is a support towards the funeral costs. So there we were on the ground doing our best as the IFP. Having said that, the recent unrest in KwaZulu-Natal had negative consequences for farmers and agri-businesses in KZN, not least of which are the financial losses estimated at close to R1 billion. The unrest highlighted vulnerability and food insecurity in many communities in KZN and Gauteng. Land reform, government-funded farms, institutions, and infrastructure were also heavily impacted. The IFP notes with concern the immense amount of work that must be done to return to the pre-pandemic trajectory in the sector, especially with the declared state of disaster in KZN. The IFP also urges law enforcement and the relevant stakeholders to implement the Rural Safety and Strategy Plan to ensure the safety of farming communities and provision of assistance during unrest. To this end, Honorable Chairperson, I think it will be very, very important for government to support all the neighborhood watchers and community watchers that contributed to helping the police and security forces protect themselves as communities. They need to be supported with infrastructure and basic needs that will help them continue doing this work of being the eyes and ears of the police. Turning to the visit to the UPL factory, the storage of dangerous chemicals in or near a residential area and opposite a school, no less, is not only reckless endangerment in terms of human health and lives, but also poses a long-term potential environment damage in these areas. The flouting of authorization and regulatory compliance by UPL is currently being investigated, and we ask that this be expedited at the utmost urgency. No less than 5 multi-specialist site visits had to be undertaken by local departments following the incident in order to assess the extent of the damage. Frequent site visits have occurred, further drawing upon scarce local government resources at great expense. The IFP trusts that UPL will honor the commitment made by its CEO as regards containment and cleanup, and that they be held liable for any damages suffered to private property and individuals as a result of the fire. The focus should not only be on rehabilitating infrastructure that was damaged, but assessing the impact on the communities, the health impacts on communities that live around there. Having said that, Honorable Chairperson, in the early hours this morning, there was a fire at a plastics factory south of Durban. Fortunately, there were no injuries. And to this end, we call upon the authorities to ensure the most stringent compliance and insist upon a full review of legislation and regulation that permits dangerous chemicals to be stored anywhere near residential or environmentally strategic areas. In fact, UPL told us that they were relying on a 1947 act, which lists some chemicals that they were storing. Now, we can't have an act which was there even before the National Party was formed and when many of us were not around. So all these pieces of legislation, outdated legislation, needs to be looked at so that if there is storage of flammable chemicals in any area, particularly surrounding communities, then we need to ensure maximum protection. What's happening in Durban South Basin and other areas with pollution is something that's not acceptable, and government at all levels needs to act. We will support both these reports. Thank you, Chairperson.
We now invite Honorable Breed.
Dankie, agbare voorsitter. Chairperson, these oversight visits undertaken by these committees only proved one thing: the inadequacy of the ruling party to rule. The alarming reality is far different for everyday South Africans that cannot hide away in safe houses away from looters like the ministers, MECs, and the rest of government. Due to the failure by government, necessary relief is not taking place. A month after the unrests, during a state of disaster, and we are not seeing departments have urgency with assisting those affected. Further taking into account that KwaZulu-Natal has been tormented by FMD outbreaks for years, and the latest one is taking COVID and the most recent riots into account, an outbreak many farmers and others in the food value chain will not be able to recover from. A few weeks back, I had a call from a butcher in the most recently affected FMD area. He supports local emerging farmers by buying only from them. He is trying to do what government is asking, thus supporting local emerging farmers, not extorting them, and still trying to give the end user value for money. Every animal he slaughters, though, has to be tested for FMD. Due to the fact that departmental veterinarian expertise cannot reach everywhere, he has to privately test all these animals at an exorbitant amount for his account. Now you can do the math. If he has to taste every individual animal at a cost of around 1,000 Rand, and he buys even just 10 cows, it is an additional 10,000 Rand those animals cost, thereby increasing the selling price, which in a time like this, people cannot afford, which then decreases the business this butcher has, and because the butcher then has to retrench workers, and so the cycle just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. During this pandemic, with the increase in unemployment and the collapse of our economy, the question that begs to be answered is, shouldn't the government that says it is a government of the people that wants to see economic growth rather be empowering people like this instead of punishing them for government inefficiencies. Then, of course, you have crops that were burned to the ground, the ports looted, markets closed for business because of rioters, and all of this because government failed its people. What I am about to say, I've said many times before, and the Honourable Minister of Agriculture always gets very upset with me when I say it, but the government is not serious about food security in South Africa. Because if the government was really serious about food security, not only in the large sense, but down to household food security, as it often claims, then we would have seen change. We would have seen departments react with a sense of urgency. But then again, if you look at the fire incident at UPL that led to the pollution of air, soil, rivers, and the sea in the Cornubia area, then, and you look at the findings of the committee, it becomes blatantly obvious that the government cares more about its BRICS alliances than South Africa, people and environment included. Chairperson, as with all issues currently being faced in South Africa, if we had been more proactive and less reactive, the picture in KZN would have been different. Had we had enough vets, proper monitoring of FMD areas, intelligence services that reacted to threats of rioting that they knew about, departments ensured laws were enforced, food security, then our environment and our economic opportunities would not have looked so dire. Chair, it is time for the departments and government to man up and face the challenges that is currently tormenting South Africa. Ek dankie.
Thank you. I now recognize Honourable Thring.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. The week of the 9th to the 16th of July 2021 may go down in the annals of history as one of the darkest moments of our newfound democracy, overshadowing what took place at Marikana. As a result of the looting and destruction, over 300 people were killed, and the ACDP offers its condolences to all the families who lost loved ones. Beyond a doubt, this was not a random spree of looting and pillaging, but was a clearly coordinated attack on our constitutional democracy. The failure of SAPS in our intelligence services is best captured by this quote from the report. Mr. Channels reported that there was no assistance from SAPS or any government department during the unrest. Farmers and the community had to help themselves. The ACDP salutes farmers that came together to withstand. It's an open secret that the N2 and 3 are the main arteries of our economy, and the blocking of these national routes for almost a week caused a disruption in key value chains, affecting both our domestic as well as international markets. Farmers whose properties were not vandalized or destroyed had to sit with produce which could not get sold. Some fresh produce, flowers and milk that could not get to their markets on time had to be dumped, adding to the cash flow and financial burden of many of our farmers, mainly in KZN. To add insult to injury, many of our cattle farmers are still fighting a foot and mouth disease outbreak in northern KZN. Many of the instigators still sit in their comfortable homes with their families well taken care of. To these instigators, the ACDP wants you to remember the 150 to 250,000 mainly Black South Africans who have been relegated to the ranks of the unemployed. Now take that number and multiply it by a factor of 5 to give you the number of dependents who now stare poverty in the face. Remember also the small-scale black farmers like Mr. Makubu, Mr. S. Njikija, Mrs. S. Zibia, Mr. Sitoli, to mention a few, who have had their hard work and life investment shattered by the greed and selfishness of the instigators. These so-called liberators, masquerading as freedom fighters, have actually contributed more to ensnaring and enslaving Black South Africans under their new master called poverty. The looters have opted for short-term gain, and the result is long-term pain. Chair, in supporting the recommendations of the committee, the ACDP further recommends that the ministers of the relevant departments be held accountable for the execution of these interventions, assist our affected farmers agricultural, forestry, and fishing sectors to get back on their feet. In view of the many government lapses, we assert that it is now time for change, and the AC.
Honorable members, time has expired. You might want to go take the phone. Honorable Mutise.
And grow our country.
Now recognize Honorable Mutise.
Honorable Chairperson, thank you very much. I hope my tring does not tring. This parliament has been accused of either delaying or not holding the executive accountable as required by the Constitution. This is often an exaggeration made by those who do not care to understand the different roles of the distinct arms of the state. We, as representatives of the ANC in Parliament, take our public mandate and responsibility very seriously, and we are committed to holding the executive accountable through different processes, including conducting oversight. House Chair, on the 22nd of July, during the recess period, the former National Speaker of this House proposed this extraordinary extended National Assembly debate on the early July 7 unrest, looting, and destruction of property. The looting, destruction, and burning of property and viable and profitable economic infrastructure caused serious damage to the South African economy, threatened the livelihood of many South Africans. It has been reported that over 200 malls, 11 warehouses, 8 factories, ATMs, trucks have been looted, burned, and destroyed during this unrest, causing an estimated cost of damage to about 50 billion rand. I would like to take this opportunity to send our heartfelt condolences to families and relatives that have lost their loved ones during this past violent unrest. It is important for us to understand the nature and root causes of the violent events that took place in July. The ANC, since its watershed 1969 National Consultative Conference held in Morogoro, characterized South African state as a colonialism of a special type, and noted that South Africa has developed capitalist economy that is exploitative and based on the extraction of surplus value from wage labor. We further noted in Mangaung during the 53rd National Conference that the legacy of colonialism and apartheid reflected the triple challenges of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. This note was further confirmed by the 54th National Conference that despite the economic advances of the past 23 years at the time of freedom and democracy, this legacy of colonialism and apartheid still deeply entrenched in our society and is found in the structure of the South African economy. South Africa is regarded as one of the most unequal societies in the world, and the nature of these protests in the country have laid bare these glaring economic disparities. We took an oversight visit to KwaZulu-Natal province on the 11th and 12th August to observe for ourselves as the committee the environment damage caused by the burning and the destruction of the UPL chemical plant in Konobia. According to their own website, UPL is a global leader in food system with a revenue of about $5.4 billion and a market access of 90% of the world food basket and doing business in more than 138 countries. The importance of foreign investment and direct investment in the country cannot be overemphasized, and government has successfully attracted much needed foreign investment into our shores. The explosion in the UPL chemical warehouse caused chemical spillage that polluted the river systems, polluted the air, and affected agricultural farms within the surrounding areas, and negatively impacted on the human livelihood in the area. We were shocked to observe as the committee that a company as big as UPL did not strictly and fully comply with our legislative and regulatory prescripts. And this is indicative of how capitalist economy is exploitative and based on the extraction of surplus value from wage labor. There's a need to involve all stakeholders, as it was indicated by President Ramaphosa, that our economic strategy going forward will require new social compact among all role players, business, labor, and community. This is inclusive of government in order to restructure the economy and achieve the inclusive growth. In conclusion, Honorable Chairperson, I rise on behalf of the ANC to support the adoption of the committee report on joint oversight visit to KwaZulu-Natal. We reiterate our commitment towards building an inclusive and growing South Africa and its economy. And on behalf of the voiceless and the poor and the marginalized people of this country, we support this report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Modise. The UDM, the ATM, I now recognize Honorable Phillips.
House Chair, the unemployment rate under the ANC-led national government is rising like a child's unfettered helium balloon. At 34.4%, it is totally out of control. In desperation to try and counteract our steadily rising unemployment rate, special economic zones and special human settlement strategic integrated projects are being launched. While the Democratic Alliance absolutely supports job creation initiatives, it cannot be job creation at any cost. Authorities like municipalities and the Department of Environmental Affairs cannot allow existing health, safety, environmental protection regulations to be sacrificed on the altar of jobs at any cost at any of these developments. An income without a health or a future is no use to anyone. Scenes of devastation reminiscent of an Apocalypse Now movie greeted the Portfolio Committee when we visited the burnt-out warehouse of the United Phosphorus Limited Company in Durban. A month after the fire, and the acrid chemical smell was still present. The only sign of life around the runoff area from the warehouse were the cleanup crew in their white overalls, their boots, their respirators, and their gloves. It boggles the mind that Macro, the direct neighbor of UPL and sharing the same access driveway, were able to protect their premises, but UPL were not. Although we were assured that the facility was state-of-the-art, no mention was made of the measures that were in place to prevent or combat any possible fires. The company representative claimed that the fire could not have been foreseen. Yet barely a month before, UPL moved into the warehouse that burnt down, a warehouse belonging to the same company burnt down in India. The inability of the local fire station to deal with a fire involving water-soluble noxious chemicals without using water raises a huge question as to the preparedness of the emergency fire services. Why a warehouse where noxious chemicals are stored was allowed to operate in an area adjoining a settlement, a school and farmlands is unfathomable. How no inspections were done to ensure that any spills would be contained by berms or other measures, only the eThekwini municipality will be able to answer. Not only must UPL be held responsible for the environmental devastation, the local municipality, the local ANC municipality, must also step up and take responsibility for not enforcing the bylaws. The municipality should also be required to provide a list to the DFFE of other warehouses storing dangerous chemicals and the dates on which these warehouses were inspected for compliance. South Africa needs a government that will not only provide jobs, but also protect lives and the environment. South Africa needs a DA-led government because it's only the DA that gets things done and gets them done.
Thank you, Honorable Member.
Thank you.
Your time has expired. I now recognize Honorable Chapter from the virtual.
House Chairperson, honorable members, all South Africans. The unrest of KwaZulu-Natal within the agricultural sector were aimed at the disruption of food supply value chain and threatened food security. They were also aimed at disrupting the export of agricultural products, which are a major source of foreign exchange earnings for the country. They have negatively affected both crop and animal farming sectors. However, those who instigated the unrest proved to be a minority, as majority of the country stood up for democracy, as espoused by the Constitution against lawlessness. Sugarcane farmers suffered huge losses. Their fields were burnt, thousands of tonnages could not be crushed in time, leading to their rejection at the mills and have since been dumped. Livestock were stolen, grazing burned, abattoirs including cold storage facilities were looted and vandalized. Honorable members, in agriculture, timing is important, with planting, harvesting, and processing occurring at different times. Fresh produce needs to reach domestic and export market timelessly to realize economic value. Sugarcane has to be crushed within specified hours before sucrose levels are affected. Livestock farming requires grazing and feed to ensure its survival and logistics for processing and supply to the market. The different parts of agricultural value chain, therefore, require different types of support for job creation and, in this instance, for job preservation. Recovery of the sector needs to commence sooner rather than later, but it thus will not occur without financial support from government. It is imperative, therefore, that government financial support for recovery of the sector occurs with much urgency, especially for small and medium-scale farmers. Urgent support of the survival for the sector in the affected areas will have to come not only from national government, but also from provincial and local government. This means that Parliament should expedite special appropriation for the sector. This also means reprioritizing and spend budgets by national, provincial, and local governments. A transition period of support is critically required in the farming sector, whilst agriculture supply chain is simultaneously being re-established. This must occur in a coordinated manner in partnership with all stakeholders. Insurance claims in all sectors will need to be processed as a matter of urgency to speed up recovery. Coordination of different departments dealing with economic development is key to ensure restoration, sustenance of food security, and its protection. House Chairperson, we must stand with the farming community, workers, and the poor in rebuilding and ensuring the recovery of the agricultural sector. Many lessons have been learned, but what is critical is peace, stability, and recovery. On behalf of the African National Congress, I support the adoption of this report. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Clapper. Very shy. I now recognize Honorable Sibisi. Honorable Sibisi from the virtual.
Yes, thank you, House Chair. It is needless to say that the ripple effect of the devastating looting spree and civil unrest will be an ongoing matter since it spreads into the country's food value chains. It is estimated that this ripple effect will be felt for months to come. When the entry highway was closed as a result of the unrest, it severely disrupted the food supply chain.
Honorable Sibisi, how poor members are not hearing you properly. Can you come closer to the mic?
This is the IFP mole in the NFP, Chair.
Please, Honorable Sibisi, go ahead. Speak louder.
I hope you are hearing me louder now.
I can hear you now.
Thank you, Chair. The cost of transporting the food and fuel prices has a direct implication in looting, but this sector has long been suffering with very limited to non-intervention from government to assist farmers. We need to know what measures have been put in place by government to assist specific farmers that have been affected by the unrest and the looting. We saw on the media platforms how one farmer had to throw away 28,000 liters of milk worth 160,000 because the transport company said it cannot risk its trucks on the roads. The provision of milk, bread, meat, and sugar were affected. Our agricultural sector has been experiencing challenges since the inception of the drought, and it has been struggling for many years now, with many small-scale farmers forcefully driven out of business due to a failing economy, drought, and the lack of assistance from government. During the riots, many of the workers in KZN were not able to go to work. The impact of the crisis on supplies of bread, milk, meat, and sugar is among the biggest concerns, and this reflected on the continuously increasing food prices. Some of South Africa's sugarcane fields were set alight, and supply chain disruptions as well as security concerns resulted in producers closing their mills. Farmers have lost more than 430 tons of cane to fires. It was reported as a result of the riots. The sugar industry could lose more than 258 million in revenue. The recently announced government interventions to assist business that were looted to get back did not speak to adequately assisting farmers to get back up on their feet. Government needs to be and seen to be on the forefront of the assisting businesses, industries, and sectors that were significantly affected by the riots. The NFP will support the reports. Thank you, House Chair.
Thank you. I now recognize the Minister of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development from the virtual.
Ngiyabonga sihlalo. Ngibonge nakumalunga endlu ephakamileyo nakulabo abakhona abalalele umphakathi wonkana. Today's discussion on this oversight report by the Portfolio Committee further illustrates the impact that the unrest had in the country's economy. It also illustrates the brittleness and intricate linkages of our food systems to logistics and storage. Although geographically the unrest impacted on 3 provinces in differing scales, the economic shock was indirectly felt across the country and the SADC region as our value chains and businesses and activities are interlinked. In the agricultural sector, the recent unrest took place when we were at the peak of our citrus and grains export. Importantly, this is also a year where we have bumper harvest in both subsectors, which means the ports are much busier than in regular seasons. The unrest also coincided with the peak of the winter season, where the bulk of our animals are transferred to feedlots and abattoirs, and farmers could not proceed as the main logistics corridor, that is the N3 and N2, were closed down. The disruptions caused by the unrest led to delays in key horticulture industries such as citrus, which are also time sensitive due to the perishability of the products. Through various interactions with organized agriculture, stakeholders and Transnet, we managed to reroute the citrus and various agricultural products to other export ports, including the Eastern Cape and Cape Town ports. While these efforts were a success, it brought a heavy financial burden to the farmers and various agricultural role players. I just want to say, Chairperson, immediately when this impact was felt, government, both nationally and in the province, working with other entities and agricultural businesses and farmers organizations, we were able to actually stem the tide. And I think it's important for all of us to appreciate that South Africans stood up and stopped bickering, but did what was necessary at the time to respond. Another key point of disruption was on the broader food value chains. Honorable members, it is true that we are a food secure country at national level, but the products are produced all over South Africa and processed in various parts of our country. Each province is dependent on the other. So the KZN and Gauteng disruptions impacted value chains, although not leading to national food insecurity. On the consumer front, the looting and destruction of retail outlets and supermarkets created an artificial food insecurity situation overnight. A swift socio-economic response became necessary, while simultaneously the situation was being contained through the deployment of law enforcement agencies. I want to thank our law enforcement agencies for actually responding swiftly to the request we made to them. I thank Minister Pravin Gordhan, who actually worked with us with Transnet to make sure that we assist the citrus industry in particular. I want to thank Minister Nchabeni, Minister Kubai, as well as Minister Patel, who collectively worked with us to make sure that we address the immediate challenges. Government was able to open up the N3 and N2 in order to allow for the movement of goods. After consultation with the private sector, we were able to work together in addressing the emergency food security strategy, in collaboration with the farmers' organization, with local municipalities and mayors. I want to thank all the district mayors and local mayors, particularly in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, through the MEC Hlomuka, who convened an immediate meeting so that collectively we can plan how we address the food insecurity in the province that was facing our communities. In the process, continuous engagement with the agricultural stakeholders and provincial government was critical in coordinating the responses as well as assessing the damages that were actually felt. Our preliminary assessment indicates that the food sector has suffered tremendous losses, with most affected industries being sugarcane, citrus, pork, beef, grains, and poultry. This preliminary assessment done by government has led to the announcement of the targeted intervention and support to farmers and communities to ensure that the economic activities go back to normality. We have also noted the recommendations by the Portfolio Committee, and we will continue to give necessary briefings on the implementation of what they've asked us to do. I want to thank the Portfolio Committee as well as the Select Committee led by both Nkosi Mandela and Honorable Mudise and their members, who actually were there with us on the ground to assess what was happening and share some of the insights on the immediate things that we needed to attend to. As part of the oversight responsibility, this visit has taken note of interventions as well as those that will need to be made in order to support those who were impacted negatively. Ngithanda ukubonga kumalunga ahloniphekile alendlu ngokusinika ithuba ukuthi asebenzisane nathi kanye nozakwethu emaphondweni esikwazi ukuthi uma sibhekana nabo kanye nabalimi kanye nabasizimo ukuze sibhekane nalesi simo. Ngiyabonga, ngiyayixhasa umbiko wekomiti.
Thank you. The African Independent Hope. I now recognize Honorable Bryant.
In the midst of last month's pro-Zuma riots, flames engulfed the UPL warehouse in Cornubia, and a poisonous stream of chemicals and neurotoxins was released into Mhlanga's ancient wetlands. Local marine life was decimated, sugarcane crops poisoned, and surrounding natural ecosystems impacted forever. For almost 2 weeks afterwards, acrid fumes billowed out of the burning warehouse. It took approximately 10 days for the fire to be extinguished. What was evident from the outset was that not only did the government appear to have no clue about the dangers posed, they did little to nothing to prevent the devastation that was to follow. While Minister Cele twiddled his thumbs, the good people of Mhlanga quickly got to work to help get beaches closed, set up community groups, and do their best to help wherever possible. I myself went up to Durban that week, where the warehouse was still on fire, and saw and smelt the devastation firsthand. I saw piles of dead fish being loaded into barrels and spoke to tearful environmentalists who'd seen their lives' work being destroyed. I spoke to people who were nauseous and ill from breathing in the fumes. I'd like to thank Minister Creasy for responding to requests for assistance and for the steps she took to provide support, and also to the local DA ward councillors for their sterling work. Unfortunately, due to the complete failure of the intelligence services and Minister Cele's SAPS, the damage had already been done. It's important to also ask where ANC Mayor Mxolisi Kaunda was during the UPL disaster. During the height of the tension, which led to over 300 people being killed, thousands of jobs lost and billions of rands of damage to the economy, he was on Facebook writing, "We are Umshalozi. Umshalozi is us. #FreeZuma." He states that he doesn't believe the former president is guilty of anything, and perhaps he should read the Constitutional Court judgment. While ANC administration should have been working to literally put out the fires and save the environment, many of their politicians were instead playing political games with the lives of desperate people and business owners just so they could show their allegiance to Jacob Zuma. You see, those responsible for state capture, those who wined and dined the Guptas, who bought fancy cars with the taxes of pensioners, who colluded with Bell Pottinger, who blocked MP's cell phones in this very chamber, who embarrassed our country and who've left over 40% of South Africans unemployed, those people have not left the ANC, they're still there. Sadly, the president doesn't seem to have the will or the courage to deal with them, and people like Minister Cele and others will continue to fumble their way from one crisis to the next, while the health and safety of South Africa's people and our natural environment suffers. The damage and devastation was not caused by UPL alone, nor by the capitalist system as alleged by Honorable Modise. It was caused by negligence and a lack of oversight by the ANC local government. That's why in the coming elections, more people will be looking to the DA, because while the ANC protects its failed politicians, the DA gets things done. Thank you.
I now recognize Honorable Kasa. Honorable Kasa from the virtual.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. Amalungu abekekileyo endlu. Abaphathiswa namasekela abo nathi njengekomiti yezamahlathi inhlanzi nendalo siye saya pha KwaZulu-Natal ngomhla we-11 nomhla we-12 siyokuzibonela ngokwethu umonakalo odalwe yilangqushu ibiqhubeka pha. Kakhulu besikhokelwa ngumhlathi u-56 no-24 womgaqo siseko welizwe lethu, apho usection 22 ikakhulu athi abantu kufanele uba bangaziboni besengxakini ngempilo ngenxa yokuphefumla umoya ongalunganga. I would like to submit to the House that when there is fire, destruction of property and infrastructure, and massive littering, as we had seen during the recent looting and unrest, the environment suffers. The fire we saw bellowing from burning shopping malls and warehouses were heavily loaded with air pollutants capable of altering the chemistry of the air that people breathe. Of particular concern to the committee was the burning down of the pesticide and agrochemicals warehouse that belonged to the United Phosphorus Limited, an Indian-owned toxic chemical company. The fire, whose source is still to be determined as to where it came from, on the 12th of July, generated huge amounts of dust, debris, while emitting toxic chemical smoke around the shuttered UPL warehouse. Durban and surrounding areas were engulfed by clouds of highly toxic chemical fumes and dust for more than 10 days, while a local river system and beaches were closed off after thousands of fish were poisoned by contaminated water which poured out of the site due to lack of proper dikes, ditches, or retention dams to control the flow of toxic and hazardous chemicals from reaching the river, lagoons, and coastal water of the sea. The committee visited the Dolphin Coastal Landfill Management at KwaDukuza, which handles highly hazardous waste. We also interacted with a number of stakeholders, including government, private sector, and representatives of the affected communities. It is in this regard that we made pertinent observations and recommendations, which form the basis of the oversight visit report that I hereby submit for endorsement. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Siyabulela, thank you very much. I now recognize the PAC. Honorable Hendricks.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. We have moved from black on black violence to black on black destruction of black advancement. Al-Jamaa will vote in favor of this report as it is a stimulus to what should have been done even before the unrest. In dealing with the unrest, we must not lose focus of the NDP. The harm caused is a wake-up call that for the first time in the history of our 6 parliaments, more than half of honourable members hit the streets and were on the ground. For the first time, we took Parliament on an unprecedented scale to the street to provide much-needed comfort, as we have seen from the reports yesterday and today. But I'm disappointed. I wanted the unrest report on agriculture to show that we have empowered those who have suffered losses and didn't have insurance, and that they're already watering their crops, having been given seed, fertilizer, and poison, etc., free of charge, and further that their crops have been pre-sold at a guaranteed price, the customers being social welfare, the education, and other government departments. We don't want to hear supply chains for harm. We want to hear new supply chains operational. It is 6 weeks now. Surprise us, Minister. I saw this in another African country. The soil was turned around, the seeds planted, poison and fertilizer applied, and in 3 months we had yellow mealies, and in 5 months we had white mealies, which was grinded, bought by government, and the milling bill included in food hampers. I was there. On the oversight, honourable members must have seen homelessness and abandoned land. Expropriate this stolen land without compensation and fast-track land ownership, even if it's just 100 square meters per person. I see nothing in this report and no initiatives identified for land reform or fast-tracking. We advise that books by Dr. Achima Feji be read on agricultural and land reform. We must have seen sewage pollution of our waterways and rivers, which is worse than climate change, also chemical poison. Where were our green and blue scorpions? There is no recommendation in the report of additional free electricity for indigent needy. Lastly, no mine said that the proceeds of 1 month's mining will provide some financial relief. Insurance companies were given a payout holiday, and Al-Jamaa has called for legal opinion by Parliament that Sasria was not really liable for these claims. And now Sasria's premiums will double or triple and making it unaffordable for emerging farmers. Parliament has shown the nation that it is prepared to move away from sitting in front of computers and now it's up to government to show their mettle. Thank you very much, Honourable Chair.
Thank you. I now recognize Honourable Steyn.
Chairperson, while many of us were sitting in the comfort of our homes, watching the destruction and anarchy playing out on television screens, hundreds of farmers, farm workers, and community members were fighting a battle to stay alive and to protect livelihoods. I dedicate this speech to these farmers, farm workers, and community members who worked tirelessly to protect rural town farming communities during the destruction, looting, and burning of properties in KZN. During a period of what could only be described as a war, these unnamed heroes stood together, shoulder to shoulder, stepped up, and took leadership in their communities. I salute you. You are the reason why some of our rural towns were not totally destructed. Unfortunately, not all towns were lucky. I could not be part of our portfolio oversight, but visited KZN in the week directly after the unrest. During my 3-day visit oversight, I visited eSekaleni, Empangeni, Pongola, Nongoma, Dundee, Pomeroy, Tugela, Great Town, Mooi River, and Howick. While some towns were totally destructed and not a single shop was spared, some others were left unaffected, but only because community members put their lives at risk to stand guard and defend these towns. The people responsible for the looting and unrest realized that farmers are defending towns and started to burn sugarcane fields and veld. It forced people to work days and nights without any sleep, defending towns and fighting fires. These communities thanked the DA for visiting them during a time where they said the rest of South Africa forgot about them. And I'm told Minister Cele said he was not there because the TV could not pick him up. I'm informed that sporadic cases of arson are still taking place all across farms in South Africa. The sugar industry was badly affected by the more than 500,000 tons of sugarcane set alight and burned. It is calculated that 135,000 tons could not be delivered to mills, a direct loss of 85,000 million to farmers. Small scale as well as commercial farmers were affected, with some farmers losing their whole crop. 10 of the 12 sugar factories could also not open its door during this unrest. The agricultural sector is the backbone of our rural economy. Not only do they supply much needed jobs, they also keep our country food secure. The unrest in Durban Harbour, as well as the N2 and N3, has caused major reputational damage to us as a reliable supplier. The Democratic Alliance take note of the proposed plan to fund farmers who had losses during this period. We support these plans, but call on Minister Didiza to meet with commercial agriculture and to ensure that this does not only become an ANC election ploy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I now recognize the Honorable Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment from the virtual.
Honourable House Chair, allow me to start by expressing my condolences to all those who lost family, friends, and colleagues in the tragic events we have been debating for the past 2 days. As we have heard today, the fire incident which took place on the 12th of July at the UPL Cornubia warehouse has had serious consequences for both people and environment. Given the scale of the incident and the numerous regulatory authorities involved, government has focused on 3 areas. First and most immediate was to ensure that further environmental and health risks were contained. Second, to oversee and guide the assessment, cleanup, and remediation process. And thirdly, to investigate the incident within the ambit of the regulatory environment. These priorities align with principles clearly set out in the National Environment Management Act. Simply put, NEMA places people and their needs at the forefront of its concerns. It says that pollution of the environment must be avoided, and where it cannot be avoided, it must be minimized and remediated. It states clearly that where there are adverse effects on health and environmental damage, these must be paid for by those responsible. And it emphasizes that decisions must be taken in an open and transparent manner, and access to information must be provided in accordance with the law. And so, honorable members, public accountability by everyone involved in responding to an incident of this nature cannot be overemphasized. This does not only apply to our actions as government, but includes UPL and the specialists who have been appointed to clean up and remediate the environment that is held in public trust. Accordingly, I will make every effort to ensure that the ongoing response and remediation takes place properly and within reasonable timeframes. For this reason, and despite the fact that the environmental framework under NEMA assigns the majority of the functions to the KwaZulu-Natal Department, I have, in consultation with the MEC, deployed specialists from our department to provide the necessary support in all environmental disciplines which are currently being assessed and investigated. I expect my team to report to me on a regular basis, and I will engage with the MEC on concerns that arise. The first critical aspect of the deliverables from the specialist team is due today, and the work will be assessed against the provisions of NEMA, which governs the conduct of the environmental assessment practitioners. These specialists are duty-bound by law to disclose all pertinent information to authorities, even if it may be prejudicial to UPL. I am concerned by the delays in the submission of results because this hampers our ability to take timeous decisions in the interests of the public. As you are all aware, a joint operations center was established to coordinate government's response around the first and second priorities. And this has been led by my colleague from KwaZulu-Natal and includes oversight over extinguishing the fire, the issuing of community alerts, activation of the spill response team, closure of the beaches, and the taking of samples. Let me say, honorable members, that sampling over a period of time is crucial to ensure sound decision-making on multiple levels. Subsequent to the Portfolio Committee visit on the 11th of August, eThekwini municipality, supported by the Department of Health and other health specialists, began a public health monitoring and assessment program in the Blackburn informal settlement adjacent to the UPL workshop. This will continue on a weekly basis so that complaints by this community will be elevated and the necessary responses will be initiated. The multi-departmental investigation team, which was set up to address the third priority, has almost finished a preliminary investigation which sets out the findings, particularly in relation to the regulatory environment in which the UPL warehouse was required to operate. The final report will be released to the public, and we are hoping that this will be possible by the end of September. This investigation includes aspects related to environmental law, requirements for major hazard installations, relevant licensing requirements under the Hazardous Substances Act, the Fertilizers, Farm Feeds, Agricultural Remedies Act, as well as various local government bylaws. The report will guide further action that must be taken by government to address any non-compliances detected and to implement proactive measures to strengthen the regulation in the sector. Finally, I would like to reiterate the importance of transparency in the manner in which we respond to an incident of this nature. I therefore support the recommendation made by the Portfolio Committee to establish a multi-stakeholder forum that will receive regular reports from the JOC and ensure representation of stakeholders, including community, researchers, and the health fraternity, as well as non-governmental organizations. In my view, this will go a long way to restoring public confidence in the investigative and remedial measures underway. And it is, of course, a requirement in terms of the National Environmental Management Act. I thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the debate. Are there any objections to the adoption of the report of Portfolio Committee on Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development on special joint oversight visit to KwaZulu-Natal with Select Committee on Land Reform, Environment and Mineral Resources and Energy? No objections.
Chairperson, note the objections of the EFF.
Objections noted. Thank you. Are there any objections to the adoption of the report of Portfolio Committee on Environment, Forestry and Fisheries on oversight visit to KwaZulu-Natal on 11 to the 12th of August? No objections. Report agreed to. That concludes the business for the day. The House is adjourned.
Yeah.